also about learning how to build partnerships with humanitarian organisations and universities. So they did a lot of follow-up work on what made a good partnership, and they produced some really helpful resources to help humanitarian organisations to partner well with universities.
Okay, but thinking about some sort of a network of different types of universities that want to do these partnerships, information, and these organizations want to know how, and somehow facilitating that through that coordination can be really tricky.
And there's something that IASC did do. They had this kind of partnering on basing kind of function initially, where universities were interested would say what they would have to talk about these institutes, and they could partner like that. I don't know how effective it is as a way of creating partnerships, because it tends to be about personal relationships, isn't it? Who you know and who you trust and so on. But it would be great. And of course it was going to possess sticky friendships out, so we could really to make it really great.
That's always a question.
Evidence building projects at IASC. It's so interesting. It's an alternative sort of toolkit. And initially, I think they thought it would just be how to do M&E. And at first they called it research M&E, but research puts people off, that scares people. So I changed it to evidence building. And and the toolkit actually has nothing to do with how to do it, because there's plenty of guidance around on that. The toolkit is really how to advocate with your managers that we do better M&E, how to get buy-in, how to get support within your, isn't it all within the organisation? And there's some really nice work by other people that about humanitarian failures really to use evidence, because it's a kind of cultural thing around, I know it works, I've done it before, I've done this in other places, I know emergencies don't tell me, we haven't got time, we don't have time for all that, we know how it works, and how to try to counter that within the organisation, and then this stuff around, there's never going to be the capacity within an organisation to really do this well, if we think of research, like beyond the outcome stuff. But even when the outcome stuff, we don't analyse it properly in the way you could.
Yeah, we should just start some seminars, because we already have like 50 people online.
Okay, great.
Yeah, exactly.
If we're ready.
Yeah.
Within the movement, so I was чи там ми не бачимо? Мене. Окей. Це зал, чи учасники зали бачать зал? Так, бачу. Ну, камера включена.
So let's start. Partners, colleagues, friends, let's start. We are glad to have all of you here. We are glad that you've managed to join us, and both online and in person. This workshop is organized by the Technical Working Group on Mental Health and Psychosocial Support in cooperation with the Global Reference Working Group on MHPSS, which is working under the umbrella of Interagency Standing Committee of the UN. And right now I'd like to start from saying that we're glad that in the group we don't need to emphasize the importance of monitoring and assessment, because a lot of participants registered and continue joining us online in the Zoom platform. But at the same time, I'd like to remind all of us that without the effective monitoring and assessment system, we can't speak about whether the processes are happening and whether the assistance we're providing is effective, whether this support does not do harm to the population we provide support to, and whether in general there is any efficiency of this support. And the opposite, the effective monitoring and assessment system enables assessment of the processes, whether they are happening and whether they are happening the way we planned in our projects and programs. It enables to correct something in the process if necessary, and that's a normal practice. And also it enables assessing the efficacy of this program according to the aim that we have set. This workshop is organized by the Technical Working Group in the frames of our lifelong learning for the partners and the participants of the Technical Working Group. This is the first workshop this year on the topic of monitoring and assessment. But since that is the non-stop lifelong learning, within a year we will have the next practical sessions of different types on building capacity, so that you would receive the expert support, the one that you need, that'll help you effectively implement your programs. That's why for those who are here with us on Zoom and those who couldn't join us in person and who couldn't join us in general, this is just the first workshop. Don't worry, there will be others. Now let me introduce our trainers. So let me start from Brandon Gray. Brandon is the expert working in the headquarters of the World Health Organization in the Department of Mental Health and Substance Use. And in this department, Brandon is working on MHPSS in humanitarian settings. Brandon also completed his doctoral degree in clinical psychology at the University of South Dakota in the USA, specializing in mental health and humanitarian emergencies. Also, we have Rebecca Horn here with us, who has come from the UK and who is a psychologist by training, and her expertise is the research and capacity building, also in humanitarian settings. And that's why Rebecca is engaged into Helpdesk, technical expert assistance program, which is chaired by the Global group, MHPSS group, the reference group, and Rebecca represents the global MHPSS group. And with that, I'd like to give the floor to our trainers. They will tell us a little bit about the idea of this workshop, and I will give you the floor, and they will add more context.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Elisa, for that introduction. So I guess you know who I am. Describe a bit more about why I'm here. Rebecca and I co-facilitate a help desk on monitoring and evaluation of MHPSS. This is a help desk within the Interagency Standing Committee Reference Group on Mental Health and Psychosocial Support. That's a lot of words to say, to describe an organization that is made up of about 60 different organizations, UN agencies, NGOs, academic partners that works to coordinate MHPSS across different emergency settings. It's co-chaired by WHO and the IFRC. Now, within this group, we have a number of different help desks to support technical working groups on topics like monitoring and evaluation. So Rebecca and I co-facilitate this help desk on M&E. So we're here today and this week to support the technical working group here in Ukraine to scale up capacities on monitoring and evaluation, both at the agency level and within the system level of the MHPSS response. So thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to be with you. Really looking forward for the next few hours. We hope we can meet some of the requests or some of the needs that we've seen in our pre-training assessment. Before I say more, anything else you'd like to say, Rebecca?
I think we've been nicely introduced, and Brandon's explained about the help desk that we're both part of. So the only thing for me to add is to say how pleased I am to be here and how pleased and surprised I am to see the enthusiasm and interest in MHPSS M&E here. We don't always experience that, to be honest, so we're really, really pleased to have this chance to engage with you today and with others of you over the coming week. So thank you. I think it's over to you, Katerina.
Hello, colleagues. I'd like to say a few more words on the organizational part of our work today. So we have the participants here in the room who joined us in person, and we have participants in Zoom who joined us online. So we will work with both of these groups today, and the presentations will be shown in Ukrainian. But at the same time, we will share the link to the presentations in English, and with the English-speaking participants, we shared this presentation for your convenience. Also, within this training, we will use such tool as Mentimeter. A lot of you know it, and we will put on the screen the QR code that you can use to join this Mentimeter and vote. The questions will be shown both in English and Ukrainian on your phones, just like the answers. So it doesn't matter what language you speak, you can join our work. Also, with our team, we monitor the chat and what is happening online. So if you have questions, comments, please share them in the chat. And closer to the end of this session, we've planned to have Q&A session where you can hear the answers to your questions, of course, if you have them. And have a nice workshop. And I'd like to give the floor back to our honorable trainers.
Thank you so much, Katrina. So before we get started, I just want to describe a little bit of why we find this topic so important. So I think what Rebecca was saying is quite true, actually. Usually when we try to support around monitoring and evaluation, there's a variable amount of interest, because I think it's a topic that can be a bit dry for some people or can seem a bit intimidating. So actually one indicator of success for us today will be how many of the colleagues in the room here end up sleeping on those beds outside. Hopefully it's 0. So we'll try to keep it light, try to keep it entertaining for you. I think we find monitoring and evaluation so important, so essential, because there are a lot of examples of when it doesn't happen or when it happens poorly, and how that leads to less effective support for people that we're actually trying to serve. Let me give you an example from early in my career. I was, before WHO a long time ago, working for a small NGO that supported refugees, mostly, in different settings, different contexts. And there was a time when I was in charge of monitoring and evaluation within that organization. Now, we mostly provided clinical mental health services, like psychological interventions by psychiatrists or psychologists, medications, health-focused interventions. We also had a team of social workers who did more protection case management type of services. So fairly standard interventions. And I remember early on in that position, about 6 months into the position, I had a meeting coming up with one of our most important donors. This was a donor that was private and didn't really have much knowledge about MHPSS. So I was quite excited. I thought, I'm going to really blow this person away with some amazing graphs and figures of all the numbers of people we've served and all the services we provided. And it's going to be very impressive, and we'll get a lot more funding. That's how I thought of it. So I go into the meeting, have this nice presentation ready. I go through all the services we're providing, the numbers of people that are coming into those services, the numbers of people that we've trained, what I feel like is good data. And at the end of the presentation, the person asked, he's like, oh, that's very nice. Thank you very much. It's a very nice presentation. I'm just curious. I didn't hear, maybe I missed it. He says, I'm not a topic expert. I don't know this area. But can you tell me, are people getting better? The people who come to your services, are they coping better? Do they have less stress? Do they have fewer problems in their lives? I couldn't really answer the question because I didn't really have data on the impact of our services. We weren't really asking those questions. And I think that's a key challenge with monitoring and evaluation when it does happen. Too often it's this exercise in counting numbers that doesn't really tell us much about how our services are actually having an impact or not. And so I think that's why we're both so passionate about M&E, is that when it does tell you that information, it can make all the difference in how your programming is actually implemented and how people who are receiving those services are actually impacted or not. And I think that's the number one purpose for M&E. I don't know if you'd say anything else about it, Rebecca.
Yeah, I think I certainly recognise what Brandon's been saying, and I think many of us maybe have been in positions where we're working in MHPSS, but we're not sure what difference are we making. Are people getting better? We know how many people are using our services, but the reason we do this work, the reason we're involved in MHPSS, most of us, is because we want people to improve, we want people to cope, we want people to be able to recover from the very distressing events they've experienced. And if M&E is not telling us that, then it's failing, isn't it? And we don't know if we're failing or not, more importantly. So, just to reiterate what Brandon's saying, I think both of us do care greatly about this subject that you say M&E, people just turn off. People think this is really dry, it's boring, why do we need to tick these boxes? It's for the donors. It's not for the donors. It is for the donors, of course. But more importantly, it's so that we know that what we're doing is really changing lives in the way that we anticipate, in the way that we hope and plan for.
Yeah, exactly. So we have a tool that we'll describe to you. You may already be familiar with it. It's the IASC Common M&E Framework. Everyone here in the room has a copy. We'll put a copy of it online as well. But before we get into that tool, we just want to set a foundation on monitoring and evaluation, because I know we all come into this topic with variable levels of knowledge around the topic and what the different terms are. Some of the terms can be confusing and technical, so we just want to start with the foundation, and then we'll go into this framework, describe what it is, and practice how we can actually apply it to a real example of a program. So I think for the foundation, I'll hand to Rebecca.
Thank you. And we're going to begin by getting a sense of how you feel about MHPSS M&E. Katerina explained it to us. We're going to be using Mentimeter. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but we're going to have our first attempt right now. So I think a slide will appear, or something will appear that will explain to us how we're going to do this. So you'll need your laptop or your mobile phone, and I hope you've got access to the internet, the people in the room. Clearly, the people online, you have access to the internet. Those people in the room, it's a free open network with the hotel. So you should connect to that. Great. So here we have a QR code. If I move myself, scan this code, and it should take you directly to the Mentimeter page, and you're being asked to indicate how confident you are in your ability to plan and implement MHPSS M&E activities. So be reassured that this is anonymous. We won't know who has rated themselves as not at all confident or extremely confident, so you can be honest. We know there's great variety in confidence in relation to MHPSS M&E, and this will just give us an idea of how you're feeling right now. Of course, we do hope that by the end, if we did this at the end, which we're not, you would be feeling more confident. We'll give just a moment for the people online to share their ratings with us, and then here we go. This is exciting. We may get some results. Will we? Yeah. Beautiful. This is really pleasing to me. It's worked. Our first bit of technology. Good. So can you see how many do we have there? 42? 42? Okay, so maybe some results are still coming in, but I think we can see clearly that there's the majority of people would be slightly confident, with quite a proportion also quite confident. We don't have any who are not at all confident. Well, it's fine. If you're not at all confident, then that's okay. That's a good starting point. You can only get better. And we have some who are extremely confident, so that's great. And we hope that all of you benefit from learning something about, even if you're extremely confident, maybe you'll learn something about this framework that Brandon's going to introduce us to, which is a resource which I hope that everybody will find very helpful. So thank you for taking part in this. We will be coming to more questions later. But we will begin by for those of you who are not at all confident or slightly confident, we'll begin by just outlining some of the key fundamental concepts of MHPSS M&E, which we'll be referring to throughout the morning. So thank you for your participation in this. Can we go to the slides? Great. Oh, are you in charge of slides? Can we go to the next? Maybe. It's coming. Okay, if I could dance, I would dance for you. But, here we go. Great. Let's go to the next. Lovely. All right, so here we are. We see here already, this is the common M&E framework. This is the document you have available on your tables in the room. But those of you online, I think you've had the link. You can access it online as well. So what is monitoring and evaluation? We say the two terms together as if they are totally interlinked, and they are totally interlinked, but they are also different. So we have monitoring, which is the continuous and systematic gathering of routine information. So we will monitor a program throughout the life of that program as we go along. We're assessing progress over time. And monitoring sometimes gets neglected. We don't pay as much attention to it as evaluation, but it's really important because it tells us whether we're on track, whether we're moving in the right direction, but perhaps especially importantly, it tells us if we are unintentionally going off track or even causing harm. So if something is going wrong with our program, we need to know. If we are unintentionally causing harm, we need to know, and it's monitoring that will tell us that. We don't want to wait till the end of the program and then find out, oops, this whole group of people was either excluded or unintentionally harmed. So we have monitoring. Evaluation is assessing specific information at specific time points. And that information tells us, it's focusing on whether the actions that we took have achieved the intended results. So evaluation is more likely to happen at the beginning and end of a project, and sometimes in the middle, depending how long the project is. So we focus more on evaluation today, but we wanted to just make this point clearly that monitoring is equally important. The two things go together, and from a do no harm perspective, monitoring is crucial. Who's doing the clicking? You? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so some key concepts. You may be already familiar with these, but we'll be referring to them throughout the session, so we wanted to just make sure that we're all on the same page. I know with one of the complications with M&E is that different organizations use different terms for things. And as Brandon will explain, one of the reasons the common framework was developed was to align the terms that we use so that we can communicate more easily about M&E in the MHPSS field. So these are the terms we'll be referring to. We have the goal, which is the overall overarching aim of the project, looking at what changed, what's the long-term and sustainable change in the lives of people resulting from an intervention. And very often it's not just one intervention that contributes to this, but it's several programs that contribute to the overall goal, long-term and sustainable change. The next column down is the outcome. So the outcome is a change which contributes to that long-term sustainable change described by the goal. The outcome is what happened. It's the immediate and observable change in the lives and circumstances of people that's brought about as a direct result of the project activities and the delivery of outputs. So the outcomes contribute to the goal. And then the final line is outputs. The outputs contribute to the outcomes, which contribute to the goal. And the outputs are at the very basic level of what was done, what activities took place, and what tangible products or services were produced as a result of the program activities. So these are the three terms we'll be referring to in the course of the morning. We have one more very important term, which is indicators. We'll talk more about indicators, but we can have an indicator related to a goal, or an outcome, or an output. And the indicator is just the sign or the indication that that goal, outcome, or output has been achieved. What can we see that tells us whether the outcome has been achieved, the goal has been achieved? So indicators can be quantitative. That's to do with numbers and counting, percentages, numbers of people, or they can be qualitative. Again, we'll talk more about this later. This is often forgotten. But we can have qualitative indicators, and that's to do with people's perceptions, their values, their feelings, their behaviors, these things that are a little bit more difficult to measure, but we can measure them. So progress in MHPSS programs is measured at all levels. That means at goal level, outcome level, output level, to provide feedback on the areas where it's succeeded and the areas where it needs to improve. And every program defines how to measure success using these indicators. We measure the indicators at the start of the program, that's the baseline, and again at the end, that's the end line, sometimes again in the middle. And we'll talk about how to measure them later. Okay, I think one more slide. And you may already all be familiar with this. Can we click again? Thanks. Log frames. Most organizations use this sort of framework, a logical framework, to describe their programs. Many donors require them. And even if the donors don't require them, it's a really useful planning tool. It gives us an overview of all the key elements of the program, and we have to think these through beforehand, including how we're going to evaluate and monitor the program. So this structure, you can see it has the terms that we've already talked about. It has the goal, it has the outcome, it has the output in the first column. It has the indicators in the second column, and you can see the indicators relate to each, the goal, the outcome, and the output rows. And then the final column is the means of verification. So that's the tools that we use to measure change. And we're going to be talking about all these different elements. It's good to see them in this format, although we're going to be talking about them separately, because the real strength of a logical framework or a log frame is not only that it defines the terms, but it shows us how they relate to each other, because it is logical. It's intended to be logical. That means the outputs contribute to the outcomes. The outcomes contribute to the goal. Each indicator relates to the goal, outcome, or output that it's next to. Each means of verification relates to the indicator that it's next to. So it gives us a really clear, simple framework. And we can see where there are gaps. We can see where we need to work harder to be clearer and more specific. So this is a key tool in developing not only programs as a whole, but also a monitoring and evaluation strategy for programs. To mention again, you may be working in an organization that has something that looks like this, but you use different terms. Maybe you don't use the term outcomes or indicators, or you may use results or expected results, and different terms like this, which mean the same thing, but they create a bit of confusion when we're trying to talk together. And so the common framework that Brandon will tell us about uses the terms that we see here. And we'll use these terms today. And I hope that that will help us to communicate more clearly among ourselves about what we're talking about when we talk about means of verification and so on. Ooh. Okay, one more thing to say, and then we're going to ask you again to share your thoughts using the Mentimeter. So what we've talked about now is really just standard monitoring and evaluation concepts and terms and ideas. But we're talking about MHPSS M&E. And there are some things about MHPSS M&E that make it a little bit different to other types of M&E, things that we might want to think about. So what is different about MHPSS M&E? Well, we know that in MHPSS we are focusing on the changes in the lives of individuals, families and communities. And those changes, thank you, can be changes in how we feel, in our emotions, in our behaviors, in our relationships, in our thoughts, in our attitudes, all of these things that can sometimes be quite difficult to measure, or people feel that they're difficult to measure because we can't see them directly we have to use some kind of proxy measure. We can't see a thought. We can't see an attitude. We can't see a relationship the way that WASH, shelter, and some of the other sectors can see the results of their activities. But we can measure them. We need to find different ways of measuring them. And organisations can struggle with that sometimes. Secondly, can we click on it again? So MHPSS interventions, we have two types, don't we? We have the MHPSS interventions, and those are the programs that directly intend to change thoughts, attitudes, behaviours, relationships, and so on, and make them more positive. But we also have the types of programs which are intended to produce other outcomes primarily, things to do with education perhaps, or physical health, or protection. There's all kinds of different programs which also, at the same time as achieving their primary outcome, maybe educating children, we know that they're also having an impact on the psychosocial well-being and mental health of those children. So we want to also try to measure what are the mental health and psychosocial effects of those types of programs, which may be in other sectors, and not primarily focused on MHPSS, but it's in there. We know it's in there. And if we don't measure it, it looks as though nothing's happening. If we don't measure MHPSS outcomes in an education program, we might see the children are becoming more literate and more numerate, and that's fantastic. But we don't see that they're developing better social skills. They're learning to cooperate. They're learning to solve problems in their own lives. They're learning also to manage their own emotions. We only know that, really, if we measure it. And so it's really important that we find ways of doing that. But organisations do struggle. They struggle sometimes to identify what are the changes in thoughts, feelings, behaviours, relationships that this programme might achieve. So an education specialist might struggle to see what are the psychosocial changes for these children. And that's about identifying outcomes, psychosocial outcomes and indicators. Even if an organisation can do that, they then may struggle to find ways of measuring them. So they may say, okay, we have this great education program, and we know that children are benefiting, they're managing their emotions better. But how do we measure that? What means of verification can we find that will show us the impact our program is having on children's ability to manage emotions? So that's the other challenge with MHPSS M&E. It can be hard to identify what changes do we actually expect to occur as a result of this program, what are our expected outcomes and indicators, and then it can be difficult to find ways of measuring those which we can rely on, which are reliable and valid with that community. So these are the challenges that we are hoping to support you and other organisations with this week. We do have ways of doing this. There's been a lot of development over the last few years in terms of resources and guidance on how to do this. So that's what we'd like to share with you. But before we do, we would like to ask you another Mentimeter question. And again, it's anonymous, so don't feel that this is sharing more than you want to. But we would like to know, for you, in your organisation or the area of work that you are involved with, what are the barriers or the challenges to MHPSS M&E in your context? And this is an open text box, so you can just write a few words. Let me move out of the way. You can just write a few words to tell us what are the barriers to MHPSS M&E in your context. We'll give you a minute or two to do that. Okay, I hope this is working and we're getting a few responses. Yeah. Oh, look, we have some in English and some in Ukrainian. And we do have some fantastic people helping us with translation today and over the course of the week. So I think what we'll do is we'll gather all of these responses. They will really help us not only today but over the week. We'll review them. We'll review them after this session. How many? I think we might have too many. Do you think? No, okay. Yeah. Let's read out a few, if that's okay.
Some options are insufficient measurement tools, a lack of knowledge about the tools for monitoring and assessment, difficulties with methods, and so the target audience is not always eager to participate in the assessment, and also well, some say there are no obstacles generally. Some say it's difficult to cover all the beneficiaries with the assessment. There are challenges with data confidentiality, also low motivation of participants to take part in monitoring activities.
Thank you very much for that translation. So some of the things, yes, confidentiality, low motivation of people to get involved in evaluations as respondents. Those are very common issues which perhaps we won't have the time to touch on greatly today. But we will certainly be talking about methods and tools that can be used, and I hope that that will be a starting point. And as we heard earlier, and this is just the beginning, there will be several more sessions for you going through the year. So we'll make a start today on some of these issues you've raised, but thank you so much for sharing the other ones. They will be really helpful for us, but I think also for the team based here in Ukraine in thinking about what will be helpful to you moving forward. Thank you. I'm handing over now to Brandon for the next part of the session.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. So we can go to the next slide. I think if you point it there, maybe.
Sorry. What happened? Oh, is it? Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, don't worry. No,
Thank you. Okay, you can go already to the next one, actually. Thanks, Rebecca. Okay, so I'm going to quickly introduce you to the IASC Common M&E framework. You might already be familiar, but I think there are many of us who are not. So I want to just cover some of the basics of it and get through that quickly so we can practice actually using it with an example we have. So I just want to explain a bit of the rationale for having this framework. I think you already heard many of the reasons from Rebecca. Things like making sure our MHPSS interventions do no harm. I think it's one of the key pieces of the monitoring aspect of M&E. We want to use the tool to align language and the terminology we use. We also want to use this opportunity to do M&E to have accountability with the people we're serving. I think we saw a number of people responding there that a barrier is that participants in services don't really want to also participate in M&E. I know that experience myself. When I've gone to the doctor, for example, I don't want to do the survey at the end that they ask about the service. But in fact, a way of framing this is that we want to make sure we're accountable to you as service providers, that our service is beneficial to the person who's receiving the service. So really, M&E, it's really about accountability to the people we're working with. It also helps support our project implementation. It provides opportunities to promote and celebrate what we're doing because we actually have numbers and data to use. So I think there are a lot of reasons we have this framework. And I hope after we talk through it, you might also agree with some of its usefulness. And we can go to the next slide. Yes, so as Rebecca said, there are, I think,
some primary pieces of the framework that we'll talk about. One of which is a goal that the framework aligns that it's sort of an agreed, broad, large goal that we think all MHPSS interventions are trying to target across different settings. Now with the goal, the framework also has a number of impact indicators. So these are indicators you can use to assess whether or not your program is having an impact. And we'll talk through the 6 specific impact indicators in the framework in just a bit. Now there are also outcomes in the framework, and there are outcome indicators. So there are a number of options to use at both the level of the goal and the level of an outcome that you can pick and choose from the framework to apply to your programs. So the idea of this being a framework is that you don't use all of the options that you will see in there and that we'll talk about. You use it as something to guide you, to pick and choose from based on what's relevant to your situation. Now, Rebecca also mentioned outputs. Those are the specific activities that you might be doing. Obviously, in this framework, we don't list those because those are so different across settings. They're specific to your program. But they're a key piece as well that you use to inform how you're reaching the outcomes and how you're achieving that goal. Next slide. So this is I would say the broad, the large, the high-level goal I think we're all trying to achieve. We want to reduce suffering that people experience and improve their mental health and psychosocial well-being. I think that's pretty consensus, right? I think we can all agree that that's what we're trying to do. Now we have 6 indicators for measuring this goal that I'll talk about in just a second. But first, let's look at the outcomes that lead to achieving this goal. The framework has 5 outcomes that we say, as you produce these outcomes, you are more likely to lead to achieving that goal. There are outcomes at the community-focused level, so more community-level outcomes, and at the person-focused level, so more individually focused. So we can see some examples such as outcome 2, right? People are safe, protected, human rights violations are addressed, a broad kind of community-level outcome we try to achieve. At the person-focused, we can see things like people with mental health and psychosocial problems use appropriate, focused care, so care that's more focused on an individual level. So you might see these and say, wow, that's a lot, actually. My program, my MHPSS program doesn't do all of that. How could we? And that's a good point. When you see all of these outcomes, the idea is not that every single organization measures all of them and tries to achieve all of them. Rather, the idea is that across a group of MHPSS actors working together, collectively you might achieve these outcomes together, right? So one organization might be working more in the specialized setting, having individual psychological interventions, providing things more at the person-focused level. Other organizations might be working more on protection, providing basic services for all members of a community, so providing more of a community-focused level of intervention. And together, organizations working together in a setting or in an MHPSS technical working group collectively achieve all of these outcomes. Does that make sense? I see some heads nodding. I hope so. Good. Okay. So let's just try to contextualize these outcomes a little bit more to something I'm sure you're all familiar with, and that's the IASC MHPSS intervention pyramid. So I think we'll now go back to Mentimeter. Yes. So in this exercise, I want to ask you to just try to think about those 5 outcomes you saw and match them to the 4 layers of the MHPSS intervention pyramid. So you want to think about the outcomes and say, where does this outcome go? The type of interventions, what level do they fall in? Is it 1, 2, 3, 4? So we'll start with outcome 1. Emergency responses do not cause harm. They're dignified, participatory, community-owned, and so on. What level of the IASC intervention pyramid does this outcome fall? I think in the Mentimeter, you pick and drag it to the right spot, right? You click on the layer. Okay, we see a few results. Some are saying level 1, some are saying 2. Some more 1 and 2. One at level 3 now. Okay, good. So I see we have a kind of a range. I think we're centering around primarily level 1, level 2, which is, I think that's good. So this is very good. This is a very good example of how these outcomes can be a bit confusing, but I think this is correct in that level 1 is really what we're aiming for, right? If you think about emergency responses, causing no harm, being dignified, participatory, community-owned, these are things we think across any type of humanitarian intervention should be true. So we're looking at these basic services and security. It applies to everyone, right? That's across the response. We can go to the next question, outcome 2. Where do you think outcome 2 falls? Yes, so people are safe, protected, human rights violations are addressed. Where do we put this one? Good, okay. I see we're also, again, centering in more on level 1, a few higher levels, but someone really likes layer 3. We'll get there. So yes, I think this one, again, it's primarily related to layer 1. So these first 2 outcomes are kind of related to those types of programs that Rebecca mentioned earlier, where it might not be specifically focused on targeting thoughts, emotions, behavior change, but yet still is MHPSS in that it can affect those, right? So people being safe, protected, human rights violations being addressed, of course those things have an impact on mental health and psychosocial well-being and reducing suffering. And they are, of course, cross-cutting as well, so we say layer 1. Let's go to the next one, outcome 2. Outcome 3, excuse me. So family, community, and social structures promote the well-being and development of all of their members. Where do we put this one? Good, okay. I think we're getting aligned here. So yes, we have most centered around layer 2, and I think that's right. This is layer 2 is community and family supports. This is about family and social and community structures promoting well-being. Exactly, that's where we see those types of layer 2 interventions applying to outcome 3 particularly. We can go to the next one. There we go, outcome 4. Now think about the wording here. Communities and families support people with mental health and psychosocial problems. So these are specifically people with mental health or psychosocial problems. Okay, we're climbing the pyramid here, I think. So now we're at level 3. You're right. Most votes are on level 3. And the wording here, I think, is where you find the answer. Focused, non-specialized supports. Right, so this is saying communities and families are supporting people, a focused group of people, people with mental health and psychosocial problems. So that's where we see this outcome laying, level 3. And then the last one, let's go to outcome 5. People with mental health and psychosocial problems use appropriate focused care. Where do we put this? Exactly. I think I think this one's clear. Layer 4 is what we're talking about here. So the purpose of this exercise is just for you to kind of think about, if you understand where your MHPSS intervention falls in your agency, if you think about this is a layer 2 intervention, this is a layer 4 intervention, that can help you kind of decide which of these outcomes you will choose if you use this framework. So it's a bit of kind of contextualizing it. If we go back to the slides. Yeah, so here's the range of them. We'll go to the next slide. So let's talk a bit more about the indicators that we can use for the goal and the outcomes. First, we'll go to the goal. Now, I mentioned trying to measure impact, right? Are people improving as a result of our services? What the IASC M&E framework has is 6 impact type indicators. These are things like functioning. Does the program increase someone's level of functioning? Does it increase their subjective well-being? Does it reduce their symptoms of mental health conditions or their levels of distress? Does it increase their ability to cope? What's the impact on social relationships? Their behavior towards other people, or their sense of connectedness with the community or with other people in their family, for example. These are all the types of things we think different MHPSS interventions try to target. Now, this was a long process to come to these 6 indicators, but I think you'll see that they are quite relevant across the range of different types of interventions. Next slide. So you can click. Yep, so those 6 indicators at the goal level. Each of the outcomes also has a set of indicators as well. So outcome 1 has 9 indicators to choose from. Outcome 2 has 8. Outcome 3 has 11. Outcome 4 has 4. And outcome 5 has 8. And there's a table in the M&E framework that summarizes each of these and lists what they are. Now, you might see that and say, wow, that is a ton of indicators. And you're right, it is. The point, again, is not that you would measure all of them. In fact, you would actually just choose, at a minimum, we say, 1 at the impact level and 1 at the outcome level. So say you choose your program is focused on reducing symptoms. So you choose symptom reduction at the impact level of the goal. And say you're focused on providing services to people, providing psychological interventions, for example, to people with mental health problems. So that's outcome 5. And that's 1 indicator at the outcome 5 level. We'll give an example of this. But that's the point. You don't choose all of them. You select what's relevant for you. It's kind of like a menu that you take and you apply and you adapt to your specific agency and your program. Next one. Now, we also mentioned that there are means of verification. What's a means of verification? I think it's a maybe unnecessarily complicated term. It's just a tool to measure your indicator, right? We say coping ability. How do we measure that? How do I measure if someone can cope better or not? That's our means of verification. The framework has a set of quantitative means of verification and qualitative means of verification, meaning assessment tools, like surveys, questionnaires, focus group discussions. And the point of these are just to get a structured, systematic answer to the question of, are people coping better, for example? Are they having better functioning? Are their symptoms reducing? So we have a set of recommended means of verification in the framework. Now, it's not the only ones. There are others you could use, but these are the ones that were chosen in this framework because they have good reliability, so they produce the same results reliably. They're valid. They've been developed through psychological research. They're translated in multiple languages, and they've been used in more than 2 humanitarian emergency settings. So we know that they are somewhat reliably useful in those settings and practical. So that many of them are quite brief. So we can go to the next slide. So I'll give an example of what those are at the impact level in just a moment. At the outcome level, now the framework doesn't have recommended means of verification for those because those are, again, quite different depending on the program you're implementing. But typically it can be things like service records. For example, if there's a service providing PM+, your outcome level sort of means of verification could be, let's say you're trying to measure the number of people who are receiving PM+ from your organization. The means of verification for that can simply be tracking sheets that each PM+ provider keeps of their services, right? So they say this person attended 5 sessions, you have a record of that. This person attended 4, you have a record of that. So those means of verification at the outcome level, you can click one more. The means of verification at that outcome level are somewhat more specific to each program. And so this framework doesn't have recommendations there, but I think they're perhaps more intuitive. Now, we mentioned quantitative and qualitative means of verification. I just want to quickly say why we have both. I think the purpose of that is actually that you need both in conducting good M&E. Let's say you have a program that shows, let me give you a concrete example. Let's say you're doing problem management plus, right? Individual counseling intervention. You want to understand whether or not someone's symptoms have reduced as a result of the program, right? So you're measuring symptom reduction, and you give them a questionnaire. Let's say it's the PHQ-9. Many of us are familiar with that, right? It's a measure of depression, 9 questions. So we say at the beginning, we give them the questionnaire, and then at the end of the intervention, we give that as well across all the people receiving PM+. Let's say we do that, and we actually see in our data, nothing changed, no impact. Symptoms are the same across people, in aggregate, let's say, as they were at the beginning, no reduction. We might think, oh, wow, PM+ actually doesn't work. WHO is making all that up. But if we have qualitative data, we might ask people a bit more about the contextual situation in their life. And maybe we understand from having a qualitative tool, like a focus group discussion with some of the people who received the intervention, or an interview with some of them, maybe we understand actually the place where we were implementing this intervention, things got a lot worse there. The economic situation got worse, the conflict got worse, many people were further displaced. So there are all these factors happening in their life outside of the intervention that would actually lead to symptoms being impacted in a negative way, right? So this qualitative information gives us data that can actually help contextualize the numbers, the quantitative information. And together you can actually have a much better picture of what's happening. Does that make sense? Yeah. So we need both. We definitely need both to really understand what's happening and to make sure that we put a context to our information. Next slide. So this is just some examples of some of the quantitative means of verification we have in the tool. You'll see on the left-hand side, there's recommendations based on age range. So there's some from very young children all the way to adolescents and older adults. And then across the top of the screen, there are the different impact indicators, the 6 impact indicators. Now, these are just some examples. There are many others in the toolkit. There's actually 46 total means of verification recommended. And again, there are many other in the world that you might know of and see that, oh, that's not in here, but they can also be useful potentially. So these are just, again, recommended ones. And you'll see there are also some gaps, particularly in the level of the young children for some of the indicators. And those are gaps where it was difficult to find tools that actually been reliably used in humanitarian emergencies. So there's more that needs to be done here. Next slide. So those were quantitative. These are some of the qualitative ones. This is just to show, again, there are a number of different qualitative tools to choose from as well. So you might be thinking, I don't really know how I would do the qualitative information. And it actually can be very simple. It can be focus group discussions, it can be informant interviews, it can be a survey with open responses. And then there are also more specific qualitative means of verification as well with more structure to them. Next slide. So all of these tools also come with a one-page sheet in the annex of the framework that describes how you use it, where you can find it, how you can score it, if it's available in Ukrainian, for example. All that information is included in this annex in the back with a number of links. But to make it even more practical, go to the next slide, there's a toolkit on a website called MHPSS.net that you may be familiar with. It's called the IASC MOV Toolkit. This can be, when you go to the website, you'll see it's in English, but actually, if you scroll down, there's a little drop-down menu where you can choose what language you want it to be in, and you can change it to Ukrainian. So it'll show the entire toolkit and all of the different levels of the toolkit in Ukrainian. And how you can use this toolkit is you can actually browse the different types of indicators by the, or the different types of means of verification by the indicator. So let's say this little yellow box here, you click on it, it's the coping indicator. So then it would go into that indicator and show all the tools that are available. And then you can filter them to say, I want one for people who are 12 to 17, and I want it to be available in Ukrainian. It'll filter to show you if that's available in the toolkit or not. So many of these tools there are many that are available in Ukrainian, and there's some that are not. But this can kind of just help you navigate and filter through it a bit, this toolkit. Next slide. Back one more, I think. There we go. So there's a bunch of other topics covered in this framework as well, right? So it's not just the outcomes and the tools. There's also chapters on, I think, some more of the challenging aspects of M&E, like how do you actually plan to collect data that we're talking about? Who collects the data? Where do we store it? How do we do that in a way that's ethical and we maintain confidentiality? All of those things are covered in the framework. There's also a chapter on how do we actually report the data once we have it? What do we do with it? How do we use it to improve our program? That's covered as well. How do we actually apply it to specific types of programs? Well, there's examples in the back of the framework as well. So a lot of different aspects of M&E are covered here in the different sections. So I'd suggest if you have time to familiarize yourself with a little bit with some of those to see what's in there and see if maybe some questions you might have about M&E are covered there. Maybe, hopefully they are. Maybe they're not. Let's go then to the next one. So I just said a lot of stuff, a lot of information, a lot of words. How would you actually use this framework in reality? So we have a chapter in there that describes briefly how you would apply it. There's 6 main steps, I would say. The first step is that you understand the needs that you're trying to address with your program. So this is a needs assessment. It's somewhat separate from this framework. It's somewhat separate from M&E, but it's the foundation, right? You need to understand what are we trying to address with this program. That's step 1. Step 2 then is designing your intervention using the framework to address whatever need you've identified through needs assessment. So, like I said earlier, that is taking the framework, choosing to use at least the overall goal, right? So that goal of reduced suffering and improved mental health and psychosocial well-being, and choosing one indicator at the level of the goal that you want to measure based on what you're trying to do. So let's say you choose the goal and you choose coping ability as the impact indicator. So you're going to try to measure how does my MHPSS program impact people's coping over time. Good. That's all you need to do at the goal level. Then you go to the outcomes level, choose one outcome that you want to try to produce, one that you think your program's trying to address, and one indicator. from that outcome based on what your program is trying to do. And then one means of verification for the impact level indicator. That's all you need to really use the framework for. That's a kind of a foundation, a base. Now you can choose more than that if you want, but that's kind of what we say is the minimum to apply this framework. So step 1, needs assessment. Step 2, design your program using the different elements of this framework. Step 3, choose the means of verification. Step 4 is to plan your data collection. So you've got your log frame, you understand what kind of information you're going to collect. You need to then think about who's going to collect it, how often, where we store it, things like that. Again, some topics that are covered in the framework. Then there's a 5th step. Obviously, you want to analyze that data. You want to collect it and then use it somehow. So you need to analyze and report it. There's also information on reporting in the framework. What does a good M&E report look like? What kind of information are we reporting? How do we analyze it? So on. And then the 6th step, I think it's maybe the most important step. You actually want to share your results and use them to improve what you're doing. So I mean sharing it by, of course, reporting it to donors, reporting it to partners, but also sharing it with people that you're trying to serve. This is how this intervention actually changed people's lives. This is what it's done. This is what it didn't do. Let's discuss how can we improve. So these are the 6 steps. Okay. So let's get a little bit more practical and try to actually apply this. I'll stop talking and I'll have Rebecca tell you about a case study we want you to try to work through to see what does this actually look like in application. Rebecca.
Thank you, Brandon. Yes, we're going to apply some of the things Brandon has been talking to us about to a particular case study, but I wondered whether this might be an opportunity for us to just pause and see whether there's anything that you would like to ask us, clarifications or a little bit more explanation about anything that you've heard before we ask you to start applying it. Are there any questions in the chat or anything in the room? Please feel free. It seems nothing in the room. Is there anything in the chat? Any questions? Not yet. All right. Well, I don't know if that's good or that's not good. But let's see. Sometimes, I know for myself, sometimes I sit and listen to things and think, oh, that sounds great. I'm going to do that. And then as soon as I try to do it, I realize I didn't actually understand at all. So maybe this case study will be an opportunity to try to apply what we're learning. And that will be the point at which questions will come. So we have a case study which I think, how is it? It's available online through these QR codes, the English version and the Ukrainian version. And for those people with us in the room, you're going to receive a hard copy. I'll wait a moment until you've all accessed it. And then we'll go through it briefly together and I'll explain the task.
Doing this individually, isn't it? In the room, yeah.
If those people in the room, you're welcome to work on this together. You can discuss, so if you want to change where you're sitting so that you can share more easily with your colleagues, please feel free to do so. Those people online, you'll be working on this individually. I hope you've all been able to access it. I'm sure if you haven't, you'll say something in the chat and our colleagues can assist you. Right. So you will see that the case study, it's related to Self-Help Plus, which I think many of you will be familiar with as a program that's designed to help individuals develop strategies to manage their own difficult emotions. a 5-session course for stress management, and it's got a brief explanation of the program. I'll give you a moment to read that, but let me give you a moment to read that. I see you're reading it as I'm speaking, so I'll give you a moment to read the explanation of the program, and then I'll explain the task. Okay, so you'll see that in summary, your organization has decided to, has a trainer already who will be training others to deliver Self-Help Plus. So it's a training of trainers initiative, and then this activity will be implemented, the Self-Help Plus will be implemented in 10 local community centres by training at least 20 facilitators to deliver 6 courses each over the course of 1 year. And here beneath the description we have a log frame. And you can see the structure of the log frame is the same as the one that we looked at together earlier. So in the left-hand column we have the program goal, and of course it's the goal that Brandon has described to us. It's from the common framework. It applies to every MHPSS program: reduce suffering and improve mental health and psychosocial well-being. And we have an indicator for that goal: percentage of people receiving Self-Help Plus who demonstrate an improvement in distress. And you can see that's related to the subjective well-being indicator. If you remember, there were 6 indicators for the goal from the common framework, and this indicator relates to the subjective well-being one. And we have some means of verification. We have PHQ-9 as a quantitative measure, and most significant change as qualitative. And then at the next level, we have outcome. So we have a space for an outcome. Let's begin with that. That's your first task. And remember, we're working with the common framework. You remember there were 5 different outcomes in the common framework. And you've all got a copy of the framework there, either online or hard copy in front of you. And what we'd like you to do to begin with is to identify which of the 5 outcomes in the common framework do you think is most appropriate for this program. Just do the outcome for now, and then we'll agree on the outcome, and then we'll start to think about indicators. So leave the indicators, but think about which of those 5 outcomes. So a helpful way to begin is to think, is this a community level outcome? Is it something that's targeting the entire community? Or is it something that's person-centered? Is it focusing on particular groups of people with high levels of distress? That's a starting point. So I'll give you a moment to choose an outcome, and then we're going to ask you to tell us via Mentimeter again. So if you've still got the Mentimeter there, you can go to the next question will come up, and you just indicate which of the 5 outcomes you think is most appropriate for this particular case. Ah, good. So take your time, no rush. You've got time to think about this and even discuss it with your colleagues, those of you who are in the room.
We're good on time too. So.
Well, yeah, we seem to be fine, so we'll give them. Oh, yeah. Okay, that's good. No, it would. It just some of them close it. Alright. Do you want me to explain again, or do you think it's fine with that QR?
No, I think it's fine.
Okay.
Шановні учасники,
Colleagues, if you have logged off from Mentimeter and now you want to vote, please scan the QR code you can see in front of you or above. You can see you can open menti.com website and enter the code 65 38 30 28 88. Please vote. Thank you.
Okay, I can see 22 people so far, well done, have chosen an outcome that they think is most appropriate. We'll give just another minute or so to those of you who've not yet chosen, and then we'll talk about which outcome might be most appropriate in this case. Just another minute or so. Okay, this is your last opportunity. If you've not chosen your outcome yet, please do so. Thank you to the 23 of you who have. Oh, here we go. Great. All right. What does it mean, that little? Is that a thumb? Someone who's in the process but hasn't yet? Oh. It does. It goes up, doesn't it? I thought it. Okay. Still more to go. I think I'm gonna. Yeah. Oh, we have one more vote. Thank you to you. All right. If you're still in the process of deciding, maybe stop. I think what we could do. Thank you very much to those of you who have engaged with this, who have looked through the outcomes, considered this case study, and made a choice. So we have 5 possible outcomes, and it's interesting to see that there's a whole range of different thoughts and opinions on which one might fit in this case. For those of you who are familiar with Self-Help Plus, you'll know that it can be implemented in different ways. And we didn't quite give you those details. And so it illustrates nicely that there is flexibility in which outcome might be most appropriate for a program, depending on how it's implemented. So let's think first about the division between community-focused outcomes, that's outcome 1, 2, and 3. And person-focused outcomes, that's outcomes 3 and 4. So the first decision to make is this program open to anybody in the community? Anyone who wants to engage with it can engage? Or is it designed particularly for certain types of people with certain types of distress? And they will be invited based on their particular characteristics in terms of mental health and psychosocial well-being. And there we have our first challenge, because of course Self-Help Plus could be either. It could be offered in a community centre, and the community told, if you are feeling unhappy, if you're feeling you'd like to learn some coping strategies, if you feel you'd like to learn how to cope with your stressors better, then please come to these sessions. Here they are, open to anyone in the community centre. If the programme is running that way, then it's a community-focused outcome, isn't it, that it's appropriate? That means outcome 1, 2, or 3. So if we look outcome 1, emergency responses do not cause harm and are dignified, participatory, community-owned, and socially and culturally acceptable. Really, outcome 1 is about MHPSS approaches or interventions which are integrated or mainstreamed within all the different responses, all the different sectors or interventions in a response. So it could be where MHPSS is integrated into shelter, WASH, health, other things. So a standalone type project like Self-Help Plus might not be outcome 1 might not be so appropriate for that. Outcome 2, people are safe, protected, and human rights violations are addressed. This tends to relate to programs or interventions or approaches which are particularly focused on protection issues, on safety, and human rights. And so again, we probably wouldn't think of this Self-Help Plus program as being within an outcome 2 type approach. Outcome 3, family, community, and social structures promote the well-being and development of their members. It could be that, couldn't it? This could be about just promoting the well-being, promoting the good mental health, protecting mental health and psychosocial well-being of all community members. Self-Help Plus could be used for that if it was open to anyone in the community. So potentially, outcome 3 could be an appropriate outcome, depending on how you implement the program. Outcome 4, communities and families support people with mental health and psychosocial problems. Well, this also could be an appropriate outcome. If our trainer skilled in training others, chose to train community members, people like teachers, religious leaders, natural helpers within the community, to support their colleagues, their families, and their other community members, then it could be outcome 4. So outcome 4 is where it's local people within the community who are trained to provide that support. And again, we don't know who these people are who are being trained. So potentially outcome 4. And outcome 5, people with mental health and psychosocial problems use appropriate focused care. So if we were selecting people with high levels of distress, and the people who were trained to provide this Self-Help Plus type support were professionals in the mental health and psychosocial field, then potentially it could be outcome 5, couldn't it? So it's all about, it's not necessarily about Self-Help Plus, it's about how we use Self-Help Plus within the program, the sector, or the response that we are focusing on. Do you want to add anything to that, Brandon?
No, thank you, Rebecca. I think you covered it well. It's just a point of how the framework is flexible. So it's, again, based on your interventions. What you're thinking makes sense based on what you're trying to do. So that's, I think this is a good example of the flexibility in use and application.
Thank you. Okay, so for the purposes of this exercise, we're going to say that this is a Self-Help Plus program which is run by mental health and psychosocial support professionals for people who've been identified and assessed as having high levels of distress. And that would make it outcome 5. Outcome 5. So let's say that in this case, it's outcome 5. And now what we'd like you to do is to think about, if it was an outcome 5 type program, which indicators would be appropriate for it? So again, we've got another Mentimeter. If you've closed it, I think perhaps you can go back using this same QR code. And we will ask you, there are 5 indicators for outcome 5. You'll see it if you open your books. I don't know in the Ukrainian version, which page?
I think the same page, so page 22, you'll find a summary of them.
Perfect. Page 22, you'll find a summary of the 8 indicators. We've only got 6 here. We've got 8 indicators for outcome 5. It's 6 here, but it will be corrected very shortly. So you'll be able to choose one. Of course, you could have more than one indicator. That's entirely possible. And what we'd like you to do here is look at the outcome 5 indicators, all 8 of them, read through them, and think of all of these 8, which do I think is the most appropriate? Which one, if I had to choose one, which one would I choose for this particular program? And then you'll be able to vote for the indicator you've chosen using the same Mentimeter link. And again, we'll give you some time to do this. There's no...
There is a smaller number of options here.
I think it's been corrected, I hope, so it's 8. There should be 8. Sorry about that. And thank you for correcting it so quickly. really.
I guess it's kind of saying maybe it's something about us being evidence-based. I think that's who's selling point for that's been sold.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Because you could say, let's see, do MHPSS as an organization booster.
It's kind of weird because it's percentage of available focused MHPSS programs. It's a percentage of the programs that are evidence,
So you were saying
which
about-
isn't quite what
No.
for this.
No, you're right. You have to make some leaps to make it fit.
Yeah, you'd have to have a whole range of programs.
Yeah,
and then
and some
be
of them
looking.
don't do evidence-based.
Yes.
You're saying that, think of yourself. Or some of the things you don't do things that are culturally appropriate.
That's right. And with this, we're just looking at one program, so it's not that we're looking at a whole range and saying,
Yeah. I think that's right.
I'll try to explain that, but I might scramble it.
That's right.
If I fail, if you think I've failed, then
It's hard to explain.
it's hard to
something
explain,
that's
isn't
not-
it?
Yeah.
I'll give it a go. There's so many.
Or we just focus on the ones that we think.
I think I'm right, yeah.
That's the easy.
It is. It just feels like because it's such a, I mean, it's clearly such the most popular by far, that to ignore it feels like
Yeah,
we're
you're right.
averting our eyes. 15 people so far. Oh, this takes some time, so I'm not gonna.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if this is. Yeah, but exactly.
You're trying to increase the
Quality.
quality of all of them. This is specific one.
Yeah. So if you were an organisation, a big one that was offering lots of different types of MHPSS interventions for different groups, then you might have this indicator as a way of assessing whether the services generally you're offering are meeting this criteria, evidence-based, cultural. But if you're just offering one, yeah,
It doesn't quite fit.
no. Okay, so thank you to the 15, is it 16 people who've already voted, but I hope we'll get a few more. I know this is getting now a little bit technical and perhaps more challenging, but I know myself from experience that the best way to feel confident, I guess, with the common M&E framework is when you're forced to use it. So when I've been forced to use it in my role as the help desk person, one of the help desk people, it does make you, when you've got a specific question that you're trying to answer using the framework, it really does make you get familiar with what's in there. And then that can help in the future. It just helps you to navigate it. So this may feel a bit difficult and technical and complicated, but I encourage you to have a go. It is anonymous. No one's judging. We're all trying. We're all learning. We'll give you some more time, a few more minutes. And then we'll review the responses. It's interesting as well to see there's a whole range of different responses. And to some extent, as Brandon said earlier, this reflects the flexibility of the framework and of these indicators, that some that can be applied depending on the setting and the context. There may be several that are appropriate, not just one. we're okay for time? Yeah. Okay, great. 20 past. Yeah. We'll not, yeah, I don't know if there'll be questions, but we'll leave time for questions. Yeah, it is perfect actually, isn't it? We're stuck on 17. It's been 17 for a while. Yeah. I'm seeing that we've been stuck on 17 for a couple of minutes. Maybe that means that nobody else is going to vote. But if you are in the midst of making a decision, can I encourage you to make your decision in the next 30 seconds or so and click the appropriate button, and then we shall move on. Okay, I don't think there's any more responses coming, so let's look at what we have. So we have 8 indicators for outcome 5, and we have, oh, thank you, whoever that was, 2 people. And we have a whole range of possibilities identified here. Very interesting. So Brandon and I, of course, have done this exercise beforehand and made our choices, but that we recognise there are other choices that could be also appropriate. So we felt that outcome indicator 4 was particularly useful for this. So you'll see that in the, oh my goodness, managing microphones and papers is a tricky business. So outcome 5.4, I'm okay, I've got this one. Oh, yeah, thank you. Outcome 5.4, in the framework it says number of women, men, girls and boys who receive focused psychosocial and psychological care, such as psychological first aid, linking people with psychosocial problems to resources and services, case management, psychological counselling, psychotherapy, or other psychological interventions. We thought this was an appropriate indicator for this programme, but of course we wouldn't take that indicator, the wording of it as it's described in the framework. That's very long and not particularly in itself targeted towards this programme. So what we would do is to adapt that to say something like number of men, women, boys and girls who received focused psychosocial support in Self-Help Plus. So it's not that you have to take the indicator and use it exactly as it's written. You can adapt it to make it focused on the particular program that you are implementing. So 5.4, we think, yep, that's a very appropriate one for this. We also thought 5.1 and 5.2 would also be appropriate. Let me try and juggle. Oh, sorry. Okay, I'll try like this. So 5.1 percentage, or let's go to 5.2 in fact. Percentages of medical facilities, social services facilities and community programs that have staff receiving supervision to identify mental health conditions and to support people with mental health and psychosocial problems. That's 5.2. 5.1, similar. Percentages of medical facilities, social services facilities and community programs that have staff trained to identify mental health conditions and to support people with mental health and psychosocial problems. So we could adapt, let's say 5.2 for this program to say something like Percentage of community programs, because we're not doing in medical facilities or social services facilities. We can take that out and just say percentage of community programs that have staff receiving supervision to provide self-help plus. So again, we've taken 5.2 and adapted it. We could do the same with 5.1, percentage of community programs that have staff trained to support people with mental health and psychosocial problems using Self-Help Plus. And 5.8 as well would also, that's level of satisfaction of people with mental health and psychosocial problems and or their families regarding the care they received. That could be adapted to be appropriate for this programme. We see that there's a lot of people who thought outcome 5.7 indicator might be appropriate. And we were looking at this and thinking, could it? And we were struggling to find a way that it could be appropriate. It seems 5.7, if I read it to you, says, percentage of available focused MHPSS programs that offer evidence-based care relevant to the culture, context and age of target group. We think that this one would be more appropriate if you were representing an organisation that delivered a whole range of MHPSS supports and services. And this indicator would help you to assess the extent to which those services that you offer are good quality. That means that they are evidence-based and they are adapted to the context. In this case, it's just one program, so we can't look at the percentage of programs overall that meet this criteria. This would be more appropriate if you had a whole range of different types of programs and you want to make sure that they are of good quality. Yeah, do you want to add something?
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Just to add, this could also be an indicator you think of it like a systems level. So an MHPSS technical working group could also measure this indicator, assessing how many of the different members of this group are adapting their programming to the culture or providing something that is, we know, evidence-based, right? And that could be a target to try to increase over time within the activities of the technical working group, right? So this is more of a, I would say, systematic or system level type of indicator rather than specific to a single intervention like we're talking about here. Yeah.
So there is, of course, an opportunity for you to ask questions. So if there's anything that we're saying that's not clear or it doesn't really make sense to you, please feel free to write something in the chat and we will come to that in a few moments. So, of course, the next stage would be, once we have our indicators, to think, how are we going to measure these? What would be our means of verification? But don't worry, we're not going to ask you to do that. But you can see that in the common framework, there's a whole range of different tools. Some of them would be appropriate, but in other cases, you would have things like the attendance lists or the supervision record form. It might not be a tool, an MHPSS type tool. It might be some other kind of programmatic records, which you keep for other purposes, but you can also use when it comes to evaluation. So we have got to the end of our case study. I don't think there's anything more that we wanted to say on that, is there?
No, maybe now could be a good point to just check if anyone has any questions about it. Any questions online or questions here in the room? Yeah. Do we have anything online? Any chat questions so far? No, not yet. And in the room, people are looking. Oh, we have a question. Yes, please.
I would like to ask you. So, this indicator that we are having here, if, for instance, I represent an organization providing a range of services, then my indicator will be whether my services are growing in number in the community, or alternatively, if we have just one program, and we are only implementing it in one community, then we are measuring the number of people who have been through this program. Yeah, is this what you mean? So if we are providing just one service, we are measuring the number of people. And if we have a broad circle of services, then we are measuring the number of services or the scope of services. We are measuring whether there is an actual implementation of the services in the community. But if there is just one service, we are measuring the number of people who are the beneficiaries. I haven't fully understood how exactly is this indicator measured.
Thank you.
Either way.
Thank you for the question. We were applying this, when we were talking about that indicator, we were applying it particularly to this case study. So we may want to measure the number of people who are attending a particular program. Really, we're focusing in the common framework. We don't focus so much on the number of people who attend a program so much, I don't think, or perhaps we do.
Okay.
But it's also about the changes that has made in people's lives. Go on.
Yeah, so I think my answer to your question would be you would want to do both. So if your organization does several different types of interventions, then you would want to use this indicator that's across those interventions, right? Trying to understand how many of them are we adapting to the context, or how many of them are evidence-based and that we know are effective, right? So that's across different types. Like, let's say you do Self-Help Plus, NPM Plus, or CETA, or other types of MHPSS interventions you're familiar with. So you could do an indicator that's like 5.7, where it's looking across the different interventions. And you would also then want to be measuring some of the indicators like we've specified for Self-Help Plus, like number of people who attend the course of Self-Help Plus, so number of men, number of women, right? You want to have those indicators as well. So I think you want to do both. You want to look at things across programs as well as within them. Does that make sense? Tell me you're saying sort of.
Well, as I see it, it has to be the quality. How qualitative is the product that we implement? So from the last example, so it would be the indicator, qualitative indicator, the quality indicator, right?
So when I was speaking about qualitative, I was talking about measures that you use to measure impact, right? So qualitative there is more about written descriptions, not about quality of the service. But this indicator 5.7, that is about quality of your programs across different types of programs, right? So are they evidence-based? Are they culturally relevant? That is a quality indicator. You're right. Is that clear? Okay, yeah, so I think you raise a very good point that you want to do both. You want to do both things, depending on what your organization does. Elisa, you want to say something?
No, I just wanted, I'm sorry, it's too loud. I just wanted to suggest probably to bring example, then it might be easier to... Я кажу, що може вам...
Maybe you should give an example, and then it'll be easier to understand this topic. Yes, please give the example. No, I mean your example from your side. What elements of your program do you have? I don't quite understand, so how this indicator is provided in general. Following this framework, I see that we have this program. And if we speak in general about many groups, many communities, then we have the percentage of people. And this final example, I calculated that it has to be the percentage, the number of people who, women, girls, boys, men, so that we also have to calculate the percentage of these people. But if it was some other program, then I don't really understand the example. How will we provide this indicator? What exactly we will look for? What mechanism of indicator use or provision of indicators?
About indicator 5.7?
I don't understand how in this program that, for example, I am in the Center of Social Support. I work in the Center of Social Support, and my program is on the work with violence. So what is my indicator in this case? What exactly? So I have people, the survivors of domestic violence, and I need to develop the program to work with the survivors of domestic violence. So what indicator, what exactly should I look at that this is the indicator of quality of my program or efficacy of my program? What indicator?
First of all, you would need to choose the right outcome, and it may not be outcome 5 for your program. And if it's not outcome 5, you could look at these outcome 5 indicators and think none of these work for me, because it may be that your program is targeting outcome 2 or 3 or 4.
Yeah, exactly. Outcome, if you're saying domestic violence, outcome 2 is about protection, I think. Outcome 2, people are safe and protected, right? So you could, maybe your program is more focused on outcome 2, right? It could be other levels. So we'd be happy to discuss your program specifically and give suggestions on what could be relevant for what you're trying to do. So it really depends across different interventions. In this case, because we were thinking about Self-Help Plus and what we'd want to measure with Self-Help Plus, we were thinking more outcome 5. That's why we chose these examples. But again, this is very flexible for your specific situations.
Yeah, and as Brandon said, we can talk to you afterwards about your particular program, if that would be helpful. I saw your hand raised. Did you have something else to add?
Thank you.
Доброго дня всім.
Greetings, everyone. You know, I clicked on that number 7 mistaken position. But why? I thought, well, maybe I didn't quite understand the importance of these indicators, because since I represent 2 charity organizations from Spain, I was, kind of focused on what we're doing and who we are. So that's why I thought that even if it's one-time action, we have to cover as many people as possible with the resources we have and we account for. So we have to provide this service in the cultural context, age, and so on, because we have experience of working in Syria and other countries where we had these tough situations, let's put it this way. And that was my mistake, sorry. Maybe it was my mistake, I don't know how you'll consider that and what you'll tell me.
Thank you for your openness and your honesty. It's not a mistake as such. We're learning, isn't it? And we learn by trying to do these things. So thank you for trying and learning and sharing your thoughts with us, your reflections. It sounds as though you were thinking of your own particular organization and what you would like to be doing. And it may be, in that case, it wasn't a mistake. Perhaps indicator 5.7 is appropriate for your organization.
Exactly. I think you actually, based on what you said, I think you chose the right indicator for your organization. If you're looking at, if you're representing 2 different organizations and you're thinking about all they do, it makes sense, actually. I don't think it was a mistake for that thinking process.
Okay, thank you for those of you who had the questions and the bravery to share with us. We can take more questions at the end, but I think I would hand over now to Brandon for just a few final thoughts.
Yes, just a few. I just want to give you a few quick tips on using this framework. Thank you. I can use the back sheet. And actually applying it or using to conduct M&E. So if we go back to this, there we go. Thank you, guys. So a first tip, start small when you're trying to do M&E for the first time, or if you're trying to really change the way you've been doing M&E. So let's say you want to measure impact, like we've talked about, right? You want to do something on functioning, you want to measure the impact on symptoms, but you're not sure where to start. Start small. It's really easy to get kind of lost trying to do all of it at once. So in our Self-Help Plus example, let's say your organization does Self-Help Plus, and you want to try to do some of this M&E like we've talked about. Maybe start with one course of Self-Help Plus. Test it one time. Try to measure impact using that first baseline evaluation and end-line evaluation of symptoms or functioning or whatever it is you want to measure. Just think about starting small to begin with and build it throughout your program or the different activities you do. Because I think M&E itself can be a bit overwhelming when you try to change the way you do it or do it for the first time. So start small, first tip. Second tip, don't try to do it all by yourself. We are here representing a global help desk on MHPSS M&E, but the MHPSS Technical Working Group here will also be having and hosting a national, let's say, M&E help desk that can be very supportive to you as you try to work through M&E challenges and try to really increase the amount of M&E you're doing or change the way you're doing it. And we want to stand as a backup to that help desk, to our dear colleagues in the MHPSS Technical Working Group. So don't do it alone when you're trying to do this. Feel free to ask questions. Feel free to reach out to these help desks. You can email the National Technical Working Group to contact that help desk. And there will be more initiatives moving forward, as Elisa mentioned at the beginning of our session here today. So don't think that this is it. You need to now take this and do it by yourself. Feel free to reach out. You're not being evaluated for that. You're not thought less of because you ask a question about M&E. There are no dumb questions about M&E. It's a challenging topic. So really don't do it alone. Third step, simple one, maybe it's obvious. Just slow down, take a breath with M&E. We've said a lot of things today. Maybe this information's been overwhelming in sometimes. Maybe thinking about doing an M&E either differently or starting to do it is overwhelming, and I understand that. So try to just pause for a minute, think about the purpose of what this is, and do it step by step. Tip 4 is to work with what you have. So every organization is coming in, I think, at a different place in terms of capacity to do M&E on different, let's say, different scales or different levels, different degrees of detail. So try to work with what you have in your own organization and do the best you can. And I say when you work with what you have, it's good to have someone who's kind of in charge of MHPSS monitoring and evaluation, a focal point, let's say, regardless of the size of your organization, someone who's sort of taking it forward. Ideally, that's not someone who also has 15 other responsibilities, but sometimes it is. And if that's the case, that's okay. You work with what you have and try to do the best you can. And then I'd say last tip, don't forget to use this data, right? Often, I think many of us are in organizations or we're in situations where we're asked to report monitoring and evaluation data, and it goes somewhere in the clouds, and we don't really know what happens with it. And then from there, we just report it the next time, and we report it the next time, right? And that's common. That can be what we kind of see M&E to be. But I think true monitoring and evaluation is actually using data that is useful to you, and you do the reporting as a second means, as a sort of an outcome of what you're generally doing to try to learn for yourself about your own programming. So it's kind of flipping the focus for monitoring and evaluation and using the data to make sure you're having an impact you want to have, you're reaching the outcomes you want to reach, and your program's doing what you want it to do. And also when you use the data, don't forget to share it with people you're actually trying to serve, right? They need to know and should know the impact of your programming just as much as anyone else needs to know, just as much as a donor should know, just as much as partners should know. So don't forget to use the data in many different ways. including with the communities you're working with. I think that's all that we had planned. If there are any other questions, yes, there's one online. Question in the chat, okay. We're just getting it up. One moment, colleagues, thank you.
So there is a question. Please, could you help us? There are a lot of verification means, quantitative verification means for the indicators of impact of the purpose. Unfortunately, they don't have Ukrainian translation. And so there is no verified and approved Ukrainian version. And if we take the strict scientific evidence-based approach, then the own interpretation and translation may be perceived as the one that is not evidence-based. So, do international organizations pay attention to this? Should we translate everything by ourselves, or should we try to find other methods and methodologies which are verified in Ukraine?
Excellent question. So this is a key point. So the means of verification, right, I showed some examples. I mentioned there's 46 of them. It's very true. Not all of them are available in Ukrainian. I'd say actually a minority are. If you look on MHPSS.net, you would filter through. The ones that are available there in Ukrainian are actually not representative of what's really available, because that toolkit hasn't been updated since 2020. So there's a lot that's happened since 2020, as you all know, much more than I do actually, in Ukraine. So that's something we need to do, and that we're going to work on doing, is updating that toolkit. But regardless of that, I would say if you're looking for means of verification and you're thinking about translating something, I think it's very good to bring that to the technical working group to ask someone else if they've already done it. In this case, there's so many organizations working here, it's possible it's already been done. So I think it's good to first don't start always from reinventing the wheel, see what's already been done. It's also very useful to try to do translation and adaptation together. So if there is a tool that many people are interested in using and it's not yet available locally, try to do that process together, because it is quite a process. There's actual guidance in the M&E framework on how you want to translate and adapt means of verification. So again, do that process together. I see Katrina and Elisa may want to comment also.
Yeah, I wanted actually, this is, okay. Yeah.
So I wanted to tell you that this question is really important, but also, Brandon, addressing it to you so that we would all think on the strategy of that, because it's not just about translation, it's about validation of this translation. Because if this questionnaire was designed in English and then it was just translated, it is not a big problem to translate something. But if we have right now, we don't have right now some tools which are translated and validated into Ukrainian, what should we do in this situation? Should we use the translation which is out there, or we shouldn't use this questionnaire that's not in Ukrainian? And the question was about that, I think.
I would say I would not recommend to just use a translation you find without really knowing much about it. I would say at the very least, have a group of people who look at it and say whether or not they think it's applicable in Ukraine, right? So a good example of a common measure that's translated often is PHQ-9 for depression, right? The questions in English make sense to me because it was developed in the United States and that's where I'm from. Some of the questions might not make sense when they're translated. Maybe they're not accurate. Maybe the translation wasn't good, So you really need to, I'd say, at least look at the existing translation as a group of people and say, does this fit our context as a first step? In the long term, you probably want to validate it too. So then maybe that group of people says, okay, yes, I think it looks good. Do a bit of piloting with it, see how it functions, see if it's acceptable to community members, right? Ask them if they agree too, that it makes sense, depending on where you're working or the target people you're focused on. So I'd say it's a process that has to have multiple steps. There's obviously an ideal process too, where you do translation, you check the translation, you check it with community members, you do back translation, right? All of that's documented in the framework, and I'd say that's the best practice to do that when you can. But when you can't, I'd say at least check it with some experts as a group, check it with the community as well before you use it full on. So that's what I would suggest, yeah. Thank you for that question. I don't know if Rebecca, if you'd add anything?
There is one more question in the chat. Can we receive some examples of tools which you used during live monitoring?
Live monitoring.
Like Kobo? Is that what you mean by tools?
Yeah.
It's a question in the chat, it's not clarified.
Live monitoring could mean many things. If I were to interpret what the question means, I would think of like a tool would be monitoring things like number of people attending a service, right? You're generally keeping records of that. You can also do regular surveying of people's satisfaction. That's kind of an evaluation, but you can also monitor that over time. So there's many different examples. It's kind of hard to give a concrete example that's useful to you without knowing a bit more about your question. I don't know if you'd say more, Rebecca.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm also struggling to understand what's meant by live monitoring.
I guess if we're also talking, sorry, just another idea. I hope I'm not confusing, but if we're talking about monitoring quality of an intervention, there are tools, like a tool called EQUIP from WHO and UNICEF, measures the quality of a psychological intervention in terms of the provider's basic helping skills. So you could use this, it's like a supervision checklist, where maybe you watch an intervention and how someone's providing it, and you say, okay, yes, they're active listening, they're reflecting what the person's saying. Oops, they made a mistake there about how they talk about confidentiality. You know, those type of tools are also available. So it really depends on what your program is, I would say, yeah. Thank you for the question. I hope that's helpful. Any other questions online or in the room?
Yeah, we have one question online. Can we receive some examples of tools which you use during live monitoring?
I think that's the same question, right? Or no? It's that second question.
It's the same question.
Same question. Okay. Okay. Hopefully the previous answer was clear. Yeah. If not, do reach out to us. We just said we can be more specific. Okay. I'd say if there's no other questions, we can thank you very much for your time today. Thank you for listening to us. Hopefully it was useful. Again, this isn't the end. There's more and more coming on monitoring and evaluation. So we'll be here to support. Of course, the MHPSS Technical Working Group is. So thank you very much. I don't know if Katrina or Elisa have anything to say, or Rebecca, final words?
Only just to thank you for your engagement and interest, and we do hope that you'll continue with this after today. It's a very short workshop, but only the beginning of the process, as Brandon said. Yeah. So yeah, thank you. It's been good to be with you. Katrina, do you want to say something?
Так, шановні колеги.
Yes, colleagues, those who are here in person. First of all, I want to thank you for the participation, both to those who are here in person and online, and I encourage you to join lunch on the first floor of the hotel. So please join our lunch, and thank you for joining this workshop today. We will share the recording of this workshop with all the participants of the technical working group, just like we will share the presentations and other materials as follow-up. Thank you, and yes, we hope that you found it useful.
Yeah, she was trying to tell me that I have to say goodbye.